Prime Minister, distinguished guests, and many, many friends. I have to begin by both complimenting and complaining to the National Prayer Breakfast, complimenting them for putting together this extraordinary program and bringing so many wonderful people to this part of the world that has been dear to my heart for more than 40 years. Complaining because the old saying goes, a picture is worth 1,000 words. And we have already heard thousands of words, and now I'm meant to compete with the picture, the theatrics that we've just heard. But I don't think anybody, any more words, can tell the story of Kurdistan better than what we just saw in terms of a message of diversity and coexistence. At this stage in the proceedings, it may seem as if everything that could be said has been said, but possibly not everybody has said it. And so I'm going to second what has already been said and tell you a little bit different story. I'd like to share some of my experience with Kurdistan to help you better understand where Kurdistan is where it is today. And the story of Kurdistan is one of destruction and rebirth, not so different from the Christian message of Easter, which we've just passed. For much of the 20th century, the Kurds were among the least fortunate people in the world. Promised a state at the end of World War I, and then they were denied it. They were divided among 4 countries, and the experience varied by country, but without doubt, the worst was here in Iraq, and it culminated in the 1980s in a genocide. I was a witness to some of that genocide. In 1987, as a staff mission on behalf of the U.S. Senate Committee on Foreign Relations, for very peculiar reasons, I came to Iraq, and then for peculiar reasons, I had permission to go to Kurdistan. And as I entered the Kurdish areas, I came across a shocking sight. Villages that showed on the detailed military maps that I had with me weren't there. And then as we went further, on one side of the road there was rubble, and on the other side, abandoned houses and bulldozers. And it was the beginning of the Kurdish genocide, although we didn't know it at the time. A genocide that ultimately involved the systematic destruction of more than 5,000 villages in Kurdistan. The next year, Saddam Hussein used poison gas on the small city of Halabja. And the nerve gas killed more than 5,000 women and children. And by this point, Saddam's plan was pretty obvious. It was to depopulate Kurdistan. But the powers in the world chose to overlook it, including the Reagan administration, which either unintentionally or deliberately obscured who was responsible for Halabja. However, in August 25th of 1988, Saddam launched a second chemical weapons offensive into Hawk Governorate, hitting at least 49 villages. Now this was far from Iran, and 5 days after the Iran-Iraq war had ended. The response in the US Senate was immediate. Senator Pell of Rhode Island introduced a bill called the Prevention of Genocide Act of 1988, to impose comprehensive sanctions on Iraq. He introduced it on September 8th. It passed the Senate unanimously on September 9th. Senator Brownback is here, would, I think, second my thought that this was really very remarkable. The next day, Senator Pell asked me and my assistant, Chris Van Hollen, now a U.S. Senator from Maryland, to go to Turkey. And we went the entire length of the Iraq-Turkey border, interviewing people, the thousands of people who had fled from Dahak into Turkey. And the stories, I won't repeat them at any length, but they remain in my memory nearly 40 years later, of birds falling from the skies, people watching as their a husband or child died because they were hit by the gas and the rest were not. And there was no doubt that the Reagan administration didn't question this, but they decided, they agreed that it had happened, that for strategic reasons, they would overlook the moral atrocity. And that turned out to be a miscalculation, because 2 years later, Saddam invaded Kuwait. And when that war was over, there was an uprising here in Kurdistan. I was here at the time. The US had called for the uprising. Then when it took place, didn't help. And then after hundreds of thousands of Kurds fled to the Turkish and Iranian borders, the US intervened and created a safe area. In 1991, Kurdistan was a devastated land. Not only was every village destroyed, but so were many cities and towns. After gassing Halabja, the Iraqi regime leveled the city. It was a pile of rubble. That part's not often told. And there were so many other stories. I went to Kusatepe in September of '91, and there were old ladies holding pictures of their young husbands, part of the Barzanis, the 8,000 Barzanis that had simply disappeared in Saddam's time, part of 182,000 people that were deported and murdered. But in spite of that devastation, Kurdistan was free. And since 1992, Kurdistan has had its own government, its own parliament, its own army, the Peshmerga. It has been de facto, not legally recognized, but de facto, an independent state. And the 2005 Constitution, negotiated by Masoud Barzani, codifies Kurdistan's status, and it makes Kurdistan law superior to Iraqi law in the Kurdistan region. So how have things worked out for Kurdistan since then? Just look around. When I first visited Erbil in 1984, it was a dusty, small city. Look at it today. It looks like Dubai. Tomorrow, many of you will travel through Kurdistan. You'll see the roads. If you go to Dahak, you'll see the American University of Kurdistan, one of 3 universities in Kurdistan that teach in the English language, and there are more than 20 universities in Kurdistan now. In 1991, there was just 1. All of this has been enabled Kurdistan to enact the culture of tolerance that we've been discussing all day. But I know that immediately or after the 1991, Kurdistan began a process of reconstructing villages under Prime Minister Necevran Barzani. And the priority went to Christian villages and to restoring churches, because what was really important in this devastated land was to have the diversity, the richness of the culture. And after 2003, Kurdistan became a safe haven for so many people, for Christians fleeing persecution in the Arab parts of Iraq, for Sunnis being attacked by Shiites, and then by Shiites being attacked by Sunnis, by the Islamic State, and also the Christians who fled Kurdistan. And I want to say a special word about the Yazidis. The Islamic State, Daesh, targeted the Yazidis for genocide, claiming they were apostates and devil worshippers. But here in Kurdistan, they were protected. They were viewed the same as Kurds. They were Kurds. And that legacy of protecting the Yazidis, scorned by so many others, is a critical part of the Kurdish culture. If you consider Kurdistan's history in Iraq, what it endured under rule from Baghdad, and what it has accomplished since, you can readily understand why the people of Kurdistan voted 93% for independence in a completely free and fair referendum in 2017. I'll just say a word about Syria, because it's at the same crossroads now that Kurdistan was 20 years ago. There's one critical difference. No community in Syria seeks to separate. All of them want Syria to work. But there's a dilemma: how to accommodate the 35 to 40% of the country of Syria that is Kurdish, Alawite, Christian, and Druze, with a regime in Damascus that is today Islamist. Imposing one community's will on the other is a formula for never-ending conflict. And the beauty of the federal system here in Kurdistan, in Iraq, I should say, is it allows each part of the country to have its own system. In Syria, the people in Rojava, the Kurds in the northeast, could maintain their secular system for Christians and for the Muslim population, the Syriacs. And the HTS might have the system it has in Idlib. It's very hard to imagine that country coming up with a common system. Finally, I have to say one word. Jesus spoke for the poor. He said, and I'm not much of a theologian, but the message was, as you do unto the least of you, you do unto me. And I think that in modern terms, you would say that the test of a society is how it treats the weakest members of the society. And so I want right now to thank Prime Minister Masroor Barzani and Minister Raybar for what they have done to protect the weakest. I'm not going to go into the story because it's still sensitive, but they know what I'm talking about. I'm talking about people that the United Nations wouldn't help, UNICEF wouldn't help, Save the Children wouldn't help. But when I raised the issue with them, there was not the slightest doubt. It's a humanitarian matter, and lives have been saved as a result, and new lives led. So let me conclude by saying again, thank you, and best wishes for the rest of your program.